Once again, welcome and thank you for being here. Very interesting program today. We are out at the Tamarack, and it's the Good Old Days Club of history. And boy, do we have some history today. My guest is public relations executive, advertising executive, raconteur, tennis player, and good man about town, Harry Spencer. We'll talk to Harry about some of his memories of the biggest little city in the world. Stay with us. Harry said, "As you all know, I have said many, many years that I am the greatest public relations man in the city of Reno. Do you think your audience would agree?" Harry, I'm not going to get into that. I mean, that's a self-serving kind of thing.
Well, you can't read your own handwriting.
I'm not going to do that. All right, let's see what else you gave me here. Oh, yeah, this is a good one. Does anybody remember when I handled the campaign for Rick Allsweed running for district attorney, and he had a noose on a television spot showing he was going to, Harry, again, and you said that was the greatest television commercial. I'm not going to ask you these. This is embarrassing to you if I ask you these kind of questions that you've given me.
No, I would like that commercial better if we could have got your head in the noose.
My head in the noose, okay. Let me try this third and final one, and then I'm going to give up. Oh, this is a good one. It was me, Harry Spencer, as public relations man at the Mapes Hotel that went to Charlie and said, "Charlie, I got a hell of an idea. Go to the city council." Go to the city council and see if you can get them to blacktop over the river next to the Mapes Hotel for additional parking. That was such a bad idea that even the people of Reno didn't want to go for that one.
Well, I knew that you didn't like it because you put in an app to get the parking meter concession.
You know what? Harry's got funnier answers to these things than I thought I had questions. He really does. A serious question. Tell us about the Olympics and your involvement with the Olympic Games in 1960.
First, I'd like to say that Don Manukian was correct. He said that getting a good introduction from you was like getting a kidney transplant from a bedwetter.
From a bedwetter. Tell us about the Olympics. You did some crazy things during the Olympics, didn't you? And big press conference.
I can tell you a few. We were fortunate at the time the Olympics was being planned. We were fortunate enough at the Mapes to get Pete Rozelle. Do you remember him?
Head of the NFL.
He was a PR man for the Olympics, and we were able to get a designation using the Olympic rings for the International Olympic Press Club. I think the first and only time that such a club had been authorized. Today you can buy use of rings for any amount.
Now you had Walter Cronkite there, Harry, I believe?
Walter Cronkite telecast the first Olympics ever in black and white, and he was a constant visitor. He would come up every night because there wasn't anything to do in Squaw Valley except to go to the Bear Pen, a bar. So we'd give him a special table, a steak, and ask him to mention the Mapes on the broadcast.
And did he mention that? All right.
Oh, yeah, he mentioned it. So we had the press club had a board of directors, Red Smith from New York, Dave Condon from Chicago, Jim Murray from LA, who were the top sportscasters or sports writers in the world at that time.
Mm-hmm. Harry, tell us about an event that I always thought was great, and unfortunately because Westerns are not that big anymore on television, we don't have it today, but I thought it was a great event. And that's the Silver Spurs, and you honored John Wayne one year. What was your involvement with that?
The Reno Chamber of Commerce started the Spurs in 1950, and they lasted about 15 years. John Wayne was the first. And then he came up to Reno with Ward Bond's widow at one time. We awarded the Spurs to Bond posthumously. And when it was over, they asked me if I would give John a ride to the airport. So I said, sure. And Mapes had the concessions, the bar, restaurant, slot machines. So he had power to bend the bar. As usual, John's flight was delayed a couple hours before he got off. So I said, let's go get a sandwich and a cup of coffee, talk. And he said, no, let's go to the bar. We went to the bar. And I said, what do you like? He said, a bottle of Jack Daniels. So we got a fifth of Jack Daniels. And he drank most of it. And I wanted to talk about all the movies he made, some of the highlights of his career. And he said, can that bullshit. He said, I'm going to talk about my buddy Ward Bond. I said, good. So he told me how he and Bond had been football players at SC.
USC, yeah.
And they got bit parts as extras in the movies. That's how he got discovered. Then he told me an interesting thing. He said, Ward and I would go out after shooting all day and hit all the bars up and down Sunset Strip looking for a fight. He said, we couldn't find anybody who wanted to fight us. We fought each other. He said, after we destroyed the bar, we asked the owner how much damage we had done. We gave them money, went to the next bar.
I'll turn it over here to Neil in just a second. A non-related question about Silver Spurs or about entertainers that you've known. Seriously, how has Reno changed, Harry? You came here in the early 50s, played basketball at UNR.
45.
Yeah, okay. How has Reno changed during those years?
I would say it lost its mojo. Reno used to be a wide open town, unique, had the only gaming legal in the U.S. at that time. Had a bunch of rough cowboys, miners, and I think the best way to describe it, had a nickname as the Paris of the West, but it was a lot more exciting than Paris.
Neil, let's turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. The founders of God Club in the early 1990s, either 1990 or 91, was Bob Carroll, Harry Spencer, Don Darrell, and one other gentleman. Harry, please tell us about your friendship with Roy Powers.
Yeah, Roy was a particularly good friend that I met when I was a senior at the university. I was majoring in journalism, and Prof. Higginbotham had a unique program he called internship, where you could take your choice of newspaper, radio, no TV at that time, pre-Bob Carroll, AP, UP.
I was out interviewing the Donner Party. Still have that videotape. It's an 8-track. Right.
Doing your Pampers at that time. That's probably true. And advertising agency. So I was fortunate enough to intern at Tom Wilson's agency, which was the premier one in town until you started Media Consultants. Remember?
I do remember that.
Oh,
yeah.
good. He remembers that.
Non-profit group never started out that way, but that's how it ended up.
Most of the same way.
Yeah, right.
And Roy Powers was assigned to be my mentor. And he was a great guy to work with. He went on to be the inside man at the Riverside Hotel. He formed an agency with Mark Curtis and Ray Carroll called Curtis, Carroll and Powers. But while he was inside man at the Riverside, a big event happened where Tom Wilson gave up the Harris account to take Harris Club. Harris was wide open. Every agency in town submitted a proposal, and Roy won out. That opened up the Riverside, and Jack Miles and Doug Trail and I made a pitch for that account and got it. So for a year and a half, we handled the Riverside. But Roy worked well with hotels and was a great guy to work with.
Bill, you have to grab a mic or use our mic, whatever you want to do here.
Good luck.
This is good.
Well, one of the questions I had, and I alluded to it in the card, was about the Riverside Hotel. But you thought what went on in Las Vegas stayed in Las Vegas? They stole that from the corner bar. But I would like to take a second to introduce where's Samantha Stone. Her mother was Faye Carroll, who played the piano in the corner bar.
Joy Carroll?
Joy Carroll.
Joy Carroll.
Joy Carroll, back in those days. Glad to have you with us. So if you can't talk about the things that went on in the Riverside Hotel, my favorite story, Harry, is about the Russians' involvement, or your hijacking the Russians when they came into town for the Olympics.
Well, it didn't happen in the corner bar. It wasn't big enough. But we were up at the Olympic Press Club one night, about midnight. Got ice cube in my mouth. Okay. And the Prince of Sweden showed up with about 10 people. And I believe it was Russ Nielsen. Do you remember him?
UPI.
UPI was there. Jim Wood, who had Gray Line Scenic Tours. And Russ Nielsen approached me and said, "What's going on up here tonight?" I said, "Well, we got the Prince of Sweden, and the Russian press corps is supposed to arrive any minute at the airport. Dale Kramer, who ran the concessions, will call me and we'll get them up here if we can. I don't know, it's pretty late." So Nielsen said, "Well, if you can get the Russians up here and get a picture of them with the Prince of Sweden, I guarantee you I'll get on the wire service," which was a big deal in those days to get a wire photo out, particularly with the Mapes in the cut line. So I said, "Well, if I can get a bus, I'll try and get them." So Jim Wood said, "I'll drive the bus." He said, "I'll go out and get one right now." He was half-gassed, so I didn't think it was a very good idea. But I got my car and we drove out to a airport. It was about 12:30, very cold night. There was a lone figure sitting out on a bench outside the airport with a bus idling in front of him. And he was the lone FBI guy in Reno at that time who I happened to know. I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm sitting here waiting for those goddamn Rusky. What do you think I'm doing?" I said, "Well, it's been a change in plan." I said, "They have to be indoctrinated into the press club before they can go up to the Squaw Valley, and I know you don't want to hang around all night. Why don't you go home, get rid of your bus? I've got a bus going to show up in a minute, and we'll take care of them. And sure enough, he said, God, thanks a lot. So he got up and left, the bus left. And Jim Wood and I went into the ambassador room, waited for the Russians to land, had a few drinks just so we weren't too sober. And when they landed, they had one guy who was an interpreter. None of the other guys spoke English. So we got together with him, and I said, what would you guys like? He said, a drink, of course. I said, okay, well, what would you have? He said, vodka. So we emptied all the vodka at the airport. And Dale said, I'm sorry, we have no more. I said, they're playing at the press club. I talked to the interpreter, and I said, there's a formality, you got to get a press club, a membership card before they let you through the gates up in Squaw Valley. We have a miniature iron curtain up there. And so he said, fine. We got the entire press group up to Mapes, and again, went through most of the vodka. And then the FBI started calling. Officials at Squaw Valley started calling, and I think the California Highway Patrol finally showed up because they heard that the press corps had been kidnapped. About 3 in the morning, we got rid of the press corps. But we got a lot of publicity. Nielsen got his picture, and things worked out fine.
Harry, today, as you know, I can always call you and I can talk to you on the phone, which I prefer doing because of my macular degeneration. Everybody wants to do email today and use the computer. Yeah, and cell phones. How did you get a story going like the Herb Cain long before there were cell phones and email? I know you guys had to sometimes hand deliver a story to Herb at the Chronicle, and you had to put the arm on him to really publish this in behalf of Reno.
The best way to get in the Herb Cain column, number one, he had to get an exclusive. If you're going to break a publicity story, you had to give it to Herb a week in advance. He had what he called a screener that worked for him. His name was Jerry Bunsen. All the items went direct to Bunsen. He picked out the ones that looked like they had some potential. Then he'd give them to Herb, and Herb would rewrite them in his unique style. So to get a one-liner in Herb was worth gold. It was terrific. And I remember he coined the phrase, he described Charles Mapes as Tarzan of the Mapes. But the best thing we ever did with Herb was the first camel race in Virginia City in 1960. The movie The Misfits was shut down because of Marilyn Monroe's absence when she went to Hollywood to be dried out or detoxified. She had a lot of problems. So John Huston, the director, and Billy Pearson, professional jockey, were pretty well gassed in the coach room one night. And they had heard that the Chronicle had challenged a newspaper in Arizona to a camel race in Virginia City. So they said, we'll be the riders, the jockeys. So they got Mapes to sponsor the whole event. Bill Harrer was an active member of the horseless carriage club at that time. 40 or 50 horseless carriages went up. When we got up there, Don Nero and I got in the enclosure, which is a mistake because they do spit. And we got a few good pictures, and everything was going pretty well. The town was crowded, a huge number of people out there. And we got the camels' reins put on, and I said, "Where are the saddles?" The guy looked at me, looked at the other guy, and said, "We forgot the saddles." So I went to Mapes. I said, "It looks like we don't have a race." He said, "We got to do it." I said, "We have no saddles." So we had two kinds of camels, dromedary and a Bactrian. Well, the dromedary has 2 humps, the Bactrian has 1. So Houston, of course, grabbed the Bactrian, had no trouble getting up. Billy Pearson said he thought he could hang on. We tried it, he kept falling off. We noticed at the high school, there was a tennis court, and the tennis net was up. So we went over, cut down the tennis net, wrapped it around the camel, and gave Billy a pretty good perch. If you see pictures today, you'll notice there's a strange netting around his camel. But so we started the race in front of the courthouse. Dondero and I were in a back of a pickup just ahead of the racers, and it was a pretty exciting race. We figured Pearson tossed it, let Houston win. But getting back to Herb King, he wrote an entire column on the camel race, because he was second for Billy Pearson. Mapes was a second for John Houston, and he entitled the column "One Hump or Two."
From the answers that you've given here this afternoon in front of the Good Old Days Club, there's no question in my mind that you've spent a lot of time in bars over the years. A hell of a lot of time.
First time on a bar stool.
First time.
I noticed the picture very well.
Okay. Let's go back. Let's go back to Neil now. Neil, a question.
Harry, I've always had a favorite movie, The Wizard of Oz.
Okay.
Yeah. And you happen to know one of the stars, Ray Bolger. Can you please tell us about Ray?
Yeah, Ray was one of the best entertainers Mapes ever booked. He was probably on the downside of his career. And Mapes had a reputation for booking acts that were on their way up or on their way down. But he had some great names. I like Bolger, the easy guy to talk to. So one day, Mapes approached me and said, I got my golf tournament coming up a couple of weeks. He said, would you and Ray Bolger like to play a foursome with me and Al Bello, who was a great golfer? As it turned out, Bolger was a better golfer than Bello, and I was a worse golfer than Mapes. But we managed to beat him in a very intense match.
Tell us a little bit about how you literally stole the cast of the Misfits from what was it, the Holiday Hotel, and brought them to the Mapes?
Yeah, that banned me from the Holiday for a couple of years. They were a good group of guys. They succeeded Newt Crumley who began it. I believe it was Carl Hicks and I forget the partner's name.
Dave
But,
Burns.
yeah,
Dave Burns.
last month, Neil, in your magazine, Nevada West, I wrote extensively about the Misfits, but I got a call late one night, about midnight, from Walter Ramage, manager of the hotel. He said, come down immediately. I said, I'm in bed, I'll see you in the morning. He said, get down here right away. So I figured something bad had happened. I went down, and it was a cold night. We hiked over to the Holiday, and there were two guys with 4 or 5 bags of luggage waiting for us in the lobby. He said, grab a couple of bags and we'll take these 2 guys to the hotel. I said, you can get a bellboy to do that. But he said, please help them. So we did. It turned out they were the advance men for the Misfits, who has worked a deal for the cast and crew to stay at the Holiday for the filming of the movie, which ran about 3 months. And Walter Ramage found out somehow, made him a better offer, and so we got him.
And Marilyn actually stayed at the hotel, right, Marilyn?
Oh yeah,
Monroe?
she stayed there and several other places.
Tell us about some of the great politicians that you encountered over the Rex Bell, Lieutenant Governor, who probably would have been governor had he lived, and Richard Nixon when he was president or running for president.
Yeah, I'll start with Nixon. I got a call one morning about 9:30, which was early for Charles to be in the hotel, and he said, the Vice President Nixon, who was campaigning for election in '68, is coming to Reno today. Did you know that? I said, yeah, I know. He said, do you plan to go to the airport to see him? I said, no, I don't care about it. And he said, my mother would like to have a picture taken with Mr. Nixon. I said, that should be easy to figure out. So I said, I have to get a photographer first. I'll call you back if he's available. So I called Don Darrow, and he said he could make it. So I called Mapes, and I said, have your mother park a car at the end of the runway concourse. In those days at the airport, planes landed on the tarmac, and they had a flight of steps up to the door. So now I had the photographer, Mrs. Mapes, all set. My only problem was to get Richard Nixon to go over and shake hands with her. So I didn't know quite how I was going to do that. But we got out there, and fortunately there were 10 or 12 guys in the receiving line, the mayor, some dignitaries, and right at the end of the receiving line was one of my best friends, Lou Spitz, who was head of DMV at that time. So I got through the gate and sidled up to Spitz and got in the receiving line. And as Nixon came down the line, shaking hands, I grabbed his elbow and said, I have Mrs. Mapes over here. She's a chief donation to the Republican Party and can probably deliver a lot of votes for you in your upcoming election. He said, really, really? I said, yeah, so we just walk over. So we walked over to the car with 4 Secret Service men behind us, and Mapes got a picture. Don Dero was happy about that shot.
I'll bet he was. You know, I remember meeting Rex Bell for the very first time in the coach room. He hung out at the Mapes when he was here, and I believe he had a girlfriend. Now, that's going to take us way back. Carroll Allen? Do you remember Carroll Allen? Tell us about Rex Bell and your experiences with him.
Well, they were mutually involved in his fatal heart attack. No, Rex would have been
He'd have been the governor.
he would have been the best governor photogenically that we've ever had in Nevada. He was a silent movie star, married
Clara Bow.
Claire Bow, and he had a Western store in Las Vegas, one in Reno. And he was a handsome guy, could ride a horse, and was a real cowboy. But he would have given a great persona to the office. So he hung around the Mapes a lot because he was great friends with Walter Ramage, the manager, best hotel manager we ever had. And he asked me if I would handle his campaign, which I was looking forward to doing. But then he, as you know, perished in Las Vegas of a heart attack, presumably at a fundraiser.
Mm-hmm. I know we've heard it
FUN.
before, but tell us again the Mickey Rooney story and Squaw Valley.
Well, I've told you so many times that I think everybody's heard it. Of all the performers that we ever had at the Mapes, Mickey Rooney was the only irritable one. It started out, Mapes called me in the office and said, we booked Mickey Rooney in for 2 weeks. I said, great. I've seen all his movies. He's a great looking guy on the screen, and it looks like it'd be a lot of fun. I was wrong. He was a middle-aged man, overweight, and very unhappy. Cranky would be mild, to put it. If he didn't have enough hot water in the shower, he'd call me up, say, no hot water, Harry. I'd say, okay, I'll take care of it. He'd say, call me up and say, no, not enough towels in the room, and all kinds of things like that. Finally, I said to him, why don't you call direct to the department that handles your problem, because with your great and wonderful name, to pay more attention to you than will me. So he did that with not a very happy 2 weeks. So I was glad to see him leave when he finally left. Then when we set up the floor shows for the Olympics, 1960, Mapes figured that he had to have at least 3 different acts during the 2 weeks because the people would get tired of one. So he booked Debbie Reynolds for 3 days, Sammy Davis Jr. for 4 days, 4 or 5. And then to top it off, we had Mickey Rooney for 3 days. So I was looking forward to working with Mick again. And fortunately, they gave me a parking place at Squaw Valley by the press tent or little shack they had there. But it was at the end of the building, and the fellow who ran the press hut told me to be very careful when I parked there, because to the right of the building, which would be the passenger side of the car, it was a sinkhole. It would freeze over at night, but it was about 3 feet deep. So I would take people up to the games. Tony Curtis, his wife, Janet Lee, who were a hot couple. They had just made 2 great movies. psycho and some like it hot. So they were very pleasant. I took Sammy Davis up, and whoever wanted to go up, we had a fleet of Lincolns that were donated to us for the use during the Olympics. So finally, Mickey called me up when I guess he was just in the hotel, and said, I understand that you take people up to the Olympic Games. I said, yeah, I do occasionally. He said, I want to go. I said, okay, Mick, you can come. Be downstairs tomorrow morning at 10 and go up. We took Mick, who I made sure sat in the front seat, John Thomas, the Mayor D, and a comedian, I forget who. So we got up to Squaw Valley, and I parked the car. I said, okay, Mick, here we go. Let's get out and get up there. So he opened the right-hand side door and disappeared.
Harry, any final thoughts as we wrap up a great afternoon and a great program? Any final thoughts at all for the club or yourself or the area or whatever?
Yeah, the God Club has been a great organization, and we have no bylaws, no charter, no dues, no purpose.
But a lot of fun, a lot of fun.
And I'll get even with you next Friday as a roast.
Harry, you are a gem to the God Club. You are a gem to the city of Reno and to Northern Nevada. Thank you very much for all the things that you have done for this area and your great program today. We want to see you back here in 10 years, so don't go anyplace. We'll see you next month, everybody. Great program, Harry. Very good.